All right, everyone, welcome back to the latest episode of Deep Dive. Just yesterday, we had Sina Tusi joining us from Washington, D.C. to discuss the side of Iran's strategic calculus and how things are playing out in terms of I'll call it the Persian Gulf War, because the Iranians, the Persians are really defining how this war is panning out so far. But for the other side of the coin, like what it means for us in Asia, I know some people, I don't know, Aaron, if you follow it, like, but I had Ronald Liamas, our resident quantum mechanics expert, sensei, samurai, like he can talk about everything. Like we discussed a bit about this, but I really wanted to get a defense expert to also discuss what are the implications for us in Asia. So I'm really, really glad to join my good friend Marco Bayan. Last time we were together, we were in Abraham Lincoln's monument. What kind
Sir.
of wonderful conversation we had there. And of course, Aaron is a defense reporter covering Philippine military modernization, U.S. efforts in the Indo-Pacific region with the United States Naval Institute and Naval News. So there's no better person to really give you this kind of a fast-paced, comprehensive 360 degrees analysis. So Aaron, before we go to our beloved region, Indo-Pacific, Philippines, U.S., countries close to our heart. First of all, am I am I wrong to say that probably Middle East IR is the worst of all regional experts? Like, I kind of know about that part of the world, and I think there's so much analytical malpractice, so much trust me, bro, like no sourcing, so much like just trust the plan. Basically just Mickey Mouse, and a lot of people who are pump priming this war are now suddenly pulling back. I actually called out even Richard Haas. He was one of the guys who wrote on Foreign Affairs, this is the opportunity. Iran is the weakest in decades and all. And here we are in this. Tell me, like, what were you expecting? I mean, obviously, I think everyone sane knew that this was not gonna pan out exactly according to the plan. But this is way more than that, isn't it?
Yeah, I'd say it's pretty uncharted territory, especially from a reporter standpoint. A lot of information coming in, a lot of information coming in fast. The social media landscape these days, especially on X, formerly known as Twitter, you have all these accounts, a lot of these grifter accounts peddling false information. A big thing we've seen from the US side, they have to release something every day saying, this is false, this is wrong, we're going to disprove this. So, just sifting through that ecosystem, it's been pretty tough and pretty tiring. And broadly speaking, the Middle East, I'm an Indo-Pacific person, so it's pretty clear over there, especially with the Philippines, surprisingly. But you get to the Middle East, and it gets tiring, very tiring. It's something I wasn't expecting.
Yeah, I mean, we'll go much into details, especially in terms of implication for Asia. Obviously, Asia was immediately part of the conversation because on one hand, you have this, I'll call it for what it is, this grifter arguments that, oh, if you take out Iran, then China will not have any more oil access, forgetting that it's a global market. China has actually even better relationship with Gulf countries, with Emirates. They took sides even with Emirates over the contested islands in the Persian Gulf with Iran. I mean, Iran never wanted to be a client. They're not like Venezuela, right? They were always independent of China. It was a very tense relationship. The Russian one is even more complicated. We can have a long history discussion on that. But the idea that we need to do this so that we hurt China completely forgets how obviously this is hurting horribly our friends and allies in GCC. 2 million Filipinos are in that region. Well, so far the attacks are more targeted, strategic assets. It's not like turning the situation into Ukraine, but nevertheless, so many Filipinos are in that area. Some of us who want to fly back home, our flights are kind of in the air right now. I don't know what's happening with the Dubai airport again. It's crazy. Economy flights are like now, like I don't know, first class flights. And then, but it's the THAAD missile. That one really got me because I was warning about that they're gonna run out of interceptors. They're gonna cannibalize again Asia, to sustain something in the Middle East. This is really a classic Godfather scene, right? Just when I thought I was out, they pull me all back in, right? This is really the Al Pacino side. Can you tell me about this? Because the THAAD missile in South Korea was a big, big deal. I was there in South Korea during the Moon Jae-in administration. China imposed all sort of sanctions. They lost billions. They got a lot of diplomatic pressure from China to host the THAAD. And last time I checked, it looks like that's heading to the Middle East because the US is running out of ways to intercept the Iranian missile. So can we transition already to that level of discussion?
Yeah, sure. Sure. So regarding interceptors and the expensive munition aspect of this, we're seeing a lot of really crucial interceptors. We all know the missile force China possesses, and beyond that, North Korea and other peer adversaries such as Russia. Um, a lot of these interceptors are in the Middle East because obviously Iran has a really big ballistic missile threat, and it's mixed on the ground over there. We're catching a lot of their missiles on the ground, but even though we're catching like let's say 95% of them, 5% is still a really large number, and you're gonna have leakers within those numbers. We've seen pretty drastic hits across the region. Missiles get through, and they are drawing down from other regions of the world. Before all of this Iran stuff happened, you had a really big drawdown from across U.S. military forces across the world, whether it's from here at home in the United States to bases in the Indo-Pacific. We've had to pull so much stuff, and this has implications for deterrence in the region. Let's say something happens in a couple of years, will we have the stockpiles? So you definitely bring up a really good point there. With that in Korea, it's also a lot more complicated. It's one thing to pull a system from the United States. It's another thing to pull a system from a long-term ally, especially when that ally has relatively pressing concerns with North Korea nearby. And what does China think about when we pull that out? So it's definitely concerning to see that on the ground. You're seeing Central Command, U.S. forces keep prioritizing hitting the drones and the missiles on the ground, but the objectives of the campaign are a bit vague. We just want to destroy their military force, which isn't really a long-term strategy. We don't know what the regime's going to look like afterwards. I'm not. It's not exactly clear if there's an off ramp right now and what that off ramp would look like. So we're just going to keep going in there, keep hitting them, keep shooting down the missiles at a arguably unsustainable rate in some cases.
Yeah, I mean, it looks like the game plan of at least the hardliners who are calling the shot in Tehran is I mean, they have the mosaic defense strategy. We can have a long conversation also about how this is panning out in terms of decision-making structure. But their game plan is to inflict so much pain this time that that will be their deterrence, that they don't even need to get nukes anymore, right? And actually, I found the nukes discussion also a little bit simplistic because even you have 10, 15, 20 nuclear bombs, that doesn't really change much unless you have second strike capability. And that will take a lot of like submarine capability, among other things. So I think people are missing also how complicated the nuclear calculus is. And last time I checked, both US and Israel are nuclear powered country, and yet it's not like it's stopping Iran from heating their assets. I mean, from what you understand, how bad is this battering of the US bases across the region? The New York Times just came out with this report saying at least between like 11 bases were severely hit, like 17 bases in total were targeted across the region. THAAD interceptors, radars were targeted. There are news even that Russia, probably even China, is helping with the coordinates and all of that. Clearly, these missiles are the shorter range missiles of Iran because these are just in the immediate periphery of Iran. This is different from what's happening in Israel because it's much farther and there are more layers of defense. I think people also miss that. Clearly, Iran is having more success and penetration rate in its immediate periphery than in Israel for both logistical and geographic region. But what is your read so far of that from OSNIT, basically from available information online? Because New York Times is just confirming a lot of things I was seeing in terms of online intelligence.
I think it could be a lot worse. With this sort of stuff, with the threat that close, when you compare the distances as you brought up. Obviously, the bases closer to Iran are getting hammered a lot more than bases farther away. I think another pressing thing is the fact that a lot of the high-end radars across the region have been kind of targeted successfully to an extent. We gave Qatar an early warning radar, and satellite imagery kind of confirms there has been damage to that. And there have been photos of potentially damaged or destroyed THAAD radar, as you brought up. So if we look at specifics, it could be either ballistic missiles, it could be drone threats. The drone threats really pressing right now. Um, it's difficult to counter just because of the way that kind of works. I mean, we were seeing crazy videos, right, of Gulf forces taking down these drones over like Dubai beaches. So this kind of shows like how complex the threat is. Not that we didn't exactly know this threat. I think we kind of underestimated, relatively speaking. There was also another report a couple of months back. Ukraine actually came up to us and they're like, we have a lot of these interceptors we developed based off of Russian threat, is based off the Russian threat we've been facing for the past almost 4 years, roughly 4 years, and the U.S. kind of dismissed them, and now we're kind of running back to them right
Yeah,
now because
Zelensky was
the lessons
warning
aren't
about
coming
it.
up.
Yeah,
Yeah, so we're kind of I wouldn't say exactly like we're dashing, but I would say like we kind of underestimate certain lessons compared to other stuff. Now, regarding like the injuries and interception rates, you do have some instances where they do get through, but generally speaking, I think the interceptor rates, at least what we're seeing right now, compared to what Iran fires, I mean, there's not exactly a lot of public data on U.S. and Israeli interceptions. But what's interesting is there's a lot of public data on Kuwaiti, on Qatari, on Emirati systems, and those Emirati systems and those Gulf state systems are pretty much the same things we use. They're the same Patriot interceptors. They also use THAAD, right? And they're doing pretty good. Obviously, there's leakers. Dubai airport's getting hit. Facilities across the region are getting hit. But by and large, I would say the shield is holding up, and what you are seeing is some stuff getting through. Obviously, what gets through will hurt a lot, and that's what we've been seeing. But I think based on publicly available data, you are seeing a large amount of things getting shot down. Of course, the cost effectiveness, we're seeing missiles that were made for a couple 100,000 getting down by interceptors that cost millions. We're seeing the drone calculus, right? These drones are pretty cheap. It's expensive to keep a fighter jet up. Even if that fighter jet just uses guns, it takes a lot of maintenance and stuff. So a lot of Gulf states need to kind of consider that going forward. Um, so it's a pretty complicated picture at the moment. But I would say, based off general assessments, it's kind of roughly similar to the air defense picture of the 12-day war last year, where the interceptors were pretty effective, but what got through was pretty devastating or relatively devastating for open source analysts and commentators.
Yeah, I mean, we see also evolution of both the drones and also the strategy. It looks like sometimes like the missiles are sent to be intercepted, and then that's when the drones come in. And then the Shahid drones seem to be also evolving. So we saw Russia retrofitting the Iranian drones, using it against Ukraine, and then it looks like now the Iranians are retrofitting again the retrofitting. So we're seeing the mutation of these missiles. They even have a kind of a BYD version, like an electric version. I don't know. People are mocking it as like green warfare. No, but kidding aside, and it's like a saturation strategy, right? They're just gonna send so much stuff, you're just gonna run out of interceptor, then you're gonna be quite naked. I mean, we also saw some of the Iranian missiles all the way to Israel. There were like 7, 8 interceptors going after just one missile. So it's not just like two or three. We saw also some in the Gulf, like 3 or 4 Patriot missiles going after one, and some of them were not even successful. So, and we know this is constant iterative learning, right? Like as you do more of this warfare, you learn how to overcome also things that you need to overcome. So there's like iterative learning on both sides. So again, before we go to Asia, in terms of like military analysis, like how much should the strategic studies, basically paradigm adjust to this reality? Because I remember, like in the first few days of Ukraine war, everyone said, "Oh, this is going to be conventional warfare. Russia's going to just roll over." And then clearly that didn't pan out. Then everyone said, "No, this is all drone warfare. The Turks send their drone." And then we see that didn't change. Next thing you know, it's like attrition warfare now. Like they're just like digging in, like World War I, Iran-Iraq war style, with still combination of high-tech drones and all of that. So clearly, I think this is a call for humility, right? Like a lot of people said, "Oh, now finally we figure out this is the new phase," and then suddenly you see again changes. I have a lot of Ukrainian friends, defense experts friends. I'm talking to them. They're also. It's very iterative. It's like a constantly evolving game theory. What is your read as a defense specialist in terms of the like? What are we learning in terms of dynamics of warfare, 21st century warfare from this?
Sure. So, within the first couple of days, this could, as you rightfully brought up, change because we're basically only 10 to 7 days into this entire mess. Number one would probably be the dispersion of Iranian command and control. So during 12-day war, they learned kind of the hard way of, if the units can't get command and control from the leadership, they're kind of going to sit still. And when they sit still, that's when they get hammered. And, you're going to get caught on the ground. You can't even get your missiles in the air. So obviously what we're seeing right now is, I believe a couple of days back, the Iranian president said we're only do selective strikes. And then the RGC, because they have their own orders, kind of want to do their own thing. So while he was saying that speech, they were hitting Oman and they were hitting Dubai. So, you're kind of seeing that. That has some implications regarding, stuff in the Indo-Pacific, just because, let's say leadership goes down, how will your military react? And, we know China really targets that. So I'm kind of looking at that. Number two would probably be, the iterative aspect. The big thing with Iran, the big concern was always kind of the ballistic missiles, the drones, the asymmetric threat. Strait of Hormuz is is basically locked down right now thanks to the insurance premiums and the threat of Iranian strikes. I believe last night around 3 to 4 tankers were actually hit in the strait. One had to abandon ship, I believe. So you're kind of
It's
seeing
a
some
serious issue
aspects.
to us because we have a lot of seafarer Filipinos. So
Exactly,
obviously, this
a
is
lot of
close to our
them.
heart. Yeah,
Yes. And, some aspects of that are working. But on the other side, uh, some aspects of the asymmetric strategy aren't working. A lot of Iranian midget submarines are getting caught at the port. A lot of their missile boats are getting caught before they can come out. A lot of the mobile launchers that they really hyped up are kind of getting plinked apart. And, those underground fortress bases that were supposed to shield it are getting basically camped on. The drones, they fly overhead, they spot everything that comes out of it, and then the airstrike comes in because we have persistent coverage. So it's definitely fluid, right? But I would say there are things to take away from doing a proper A2AD strategy, something the Philippines is looking at through CADSA, right?
absolutely. We'll
And
talk about
Taiwan
that.
potentially.
Yeah, because the
Yes.
double ISS had this fantastic. Our good friend Ivan Laksaman, I think, he just released something
Yeah.
about A to AD across Southeast Asia. We'll discuss that because we can do this to China. I mean, like in many ways, like what Ukraine is doing to Russia. Like, I think what we're learning is that middle-sized countries, if they can get their act together, whatever their regime, they could put up a good fight. So I think that's the semi-positive I want to take away from this. You know, beyond ideological debates and all of that. Just. I think just for clarification, people have to understand that this is not like a monolithic situation. Clearly, Saudi Arabia and Turkey are not being targeted that much by Iran. Those are two big powers, and Iran respects them and doesn't want to piss them off. But there's more like shot across the bow. Emirates is quite a different case because it wants to be the Switzerland of that region, and of course we know there's a dynamic between Saudi Arabia and Emirates and all of that. But Bahrain and Kuwait are not looking good. I think the bases there has have been more targeted by Iran, and Bahrain obviously has a complicating factor, which is it's a majority Shia. Some would say even sympathetic to Iran. Iranians would say it used to belong to Iran back in the day before the British colonialism in the region. And then there's Iraq, which is a completely different ballgame. I mean, we're seeing the Kurdistan region. I have friends from Erbil and all. They were telling us that the Persian New Year is coming, Nowruz is coming, and like they don't know if they can even go home. So the moment the news came out that the Kurds could join it, the Iranians are just heating everything there. That they feel is like a cell for some Kumla or some Kurdish separatist group or Mossad or whatever. And then the militias of the Iraqi militias aligned to Iran are really like rampaging across Iraq, targeting Americans, American companies. So like people have to understand there's many shades to this conflict, right? It's not like just what's happening in Dubai. The conflict is looking different in Iraq. The conflict could have looked very different if Azerbaijan, I mean, no offense to them, I mean, but if they wanted to join this war, I don't know how many, like 20,000 troops they were gonna send. Like, I think Azerbaijan came to its senses. They don't want to get involved. And then Israel is a completely different ball game, right? So, just for people to understand the complexity, because when we discuss our region, we have to see the same complexity. So, Aaron, let's go now to our region. You have Taiwan, which is super frontline, right? And quite a capable country. I was just in Taipei the other month, talked to folks who are close to the administration. We had some very serious conversations off the record on defense cooperation, among others. I mean, I think it's pretty open secret that Philippines is also getting more involved in the Taiwan, I won't say Taiwan question, Taiwan equation, right? Or I would say deterrence game. But at the same time, yeah, I think people know it. I'm a very big supporter of Typhoon missile deployment in the Philippines. I want us to have more missiles, offensive and defensive. Let's talk about that. So, what is the lay of the land? There's Japan there, there's Taiwan there, there's Philippines there, right? The immediate three, right, who are in the first island chain, with Taiwan really being the front line. And then you have the United States, Guam, and then Australia, South Korea, basically the second line. So, can you give us a lay of the land? How is this? I mean, what's going on here in terms of the layers of vulnerability and deterrence game?
Yeah, so glad you bring up this deterrence aspect. That's been a big part about recent U.S. national security and defense strategies. This deterrence in the first island chain, as they call it, to not impede China or to keep China down, but to kind of prevent it from doing big unilateral moves that would really reshape the region. And Washington has really emphasized in recent months we need these first island chain countries to help us kind of deter and counter China. And the Philippines, unfortunately, was not mentioned in any of those documents. but the Philippines is a key U.S. ally, and alongside Japan and unofficially Taiwan. These countries play a really big part in that. You bring up Guam, which is part of the second island chain, which is becoming pretty dynamic right now as we kind of fully contextualize and understand the Chinese missile and air threat that we would have to counter in a potential conflict. So, regarding the region right now, especially with this Iran stuff, it's a bit tricky as we start off with that and all that, because we're seeing shifting movements, shifting priorities. I forgot who it was from. I believe it was Zach Cooper. Zach Cooper did a really good piece like a month or two back on the failed pivot to Asia.
We
And
just had
when
him on this show. This
okay,
is partnership with Foreign Affairs magazine. So let's build on it. That was a fantastic discussion. People can check it out with Zach. Just last week, we had that conversation in his piece on the failed pivot to Asia.
yeah. So with that, it's interesting because it came out such a timely time, right, with Iran stuff, and also you kind of look at U.S. movements across the region and what we have to do to potential conflict with China. So with the region right now, you're seeing number one a big buildup of American A2AD capabilities, area denial. Um, uh, Basically, you got to block it off using missiles, asymmetric capabilities to deter a more conventional opponent. Now, interestingly enough, it's kind of a flip historically. Historically, China was the one who really focused on this idea of denying the enemy from getting close to China. They would build large missile boat fleets and rely on aircraft and missiles to keep them away from the interior of China. But now, as China builds up, we're seeing they potentially want 9 carriers, by 2035.
Yes, I'm just
They want
projecting this fantastic. Sorry about that. Yeah, yeah. Just for
oh
people to
man,
see what we're talking about here. So this is the fantastic work by folks at the IISS. This is what we can do to China in terms of a. Please go ahead. Yeah, for people to visualize what we're talking about. Yeah.
yeah, so there's a pretty good visualization by IISS on what exactly the U.S. Philippine alliance has been all about for the past roughly 3 to 4 years at this point. Started Balkan 2021, 2022. It's been evolving ever since. And you brought up Typhoon system, the ground-based Tomahawk system that could also kill ships. We saw Nemesis that's also here, right, in a really important spot on that map between the Philippines and Taiwan, and HIMARS, which could support a lot of stuff. And I don't know, I think it's pictured here. Is Brahmos pictured here? Let's see. I don't think Brahmos is pictured here exactly. Um, Let me check. Okay, yeah, there it is. They put a theoretical Brahmos range. So, this is kind of what they want to do. And the reason why is China is developing a military that's increasingly expeditionary. They want to do stuff around Taiwan, potentially throughout Asia and the Pacific. I mean, the Philippines does this really well. You guys have a lot of military bases in your EZ that are not Filipino, they're Chinese. Um, so you're facing an opponent that has conventional supremacy in virtually every regard, in virtually every aspect of warfare. So this is kind of Manila's step and also Washington's step to kind of counter that. For the Americans, right? Tyranny of distance. Uh, America is a long way from the Indo-Pacific. It's like a week sail from San Diego, San Francisco, or to Yokosuka in Japan, and potentially around the same time for the Philippines, I believe. Um, when you consider that in a conflict, that's your logistics. That's your time to get troops and new troops into the region, and China could use that to its advantage. And with the recent Chinese force developments, obviously aimed at certain contingency scenarios around Taiwan, they're building up a pretty big force to help extend that time. It takes a week to get across, but let's say there's a Chinese carrier strike group blocking your way. How are you going to deal with that? It takes a couple of days to deal with that. Okay, that's a week plus more, a couple of days to reach Taiwan or the Philippines. So that's kind of what China's doing. That's what we're doing. This map's a great visualization of what we're really doing. And I suppose we could expand on that later in this conversation.
Absolutely. Thank you for that. I just needed to bring that out for people to realize obviously different countries in the region are developing their own capabilities. What is our understanding of because like my idea was kind of a great wall of missiles, right? So from Okinawa to Taiwan, especially the Eastern Theater, yes, or Western Theater, and then Western South Theater, and then Guam, and then Philippines. Like how are we going on that? I remember back in the day, you're still too young, but we were talking about X band, like things like that. Is that something realistic? How are we moving on that in terms of basically non-confidential information? What is the state of affairs? on that. And what can we say? Of course, you and I have had off the record conversations, but what can we say about the level of Philippine involvement in the Taiwan equation? Having discussed that map, because the Taiwan one will be even more front and center, right?
Yeah, for sure. With the progress since last time we talked, which I believe was 2024, you're seeing a lot of stuff from Japan. You know, Japan is drastically developing their missile arsenal. They have an interesting strategy behind that. The strategy for the Japanese are, you know, it's technically self-defense because we're going to hit the things that are going to attack us before they get off the ground. So I heard a really interesting argument at Hudson Institute a couple of years back where they were saying, why are you guys getting Tomahawk land attack missiles? And one guy was basically saying, oh, these are air defense missiles because we're targeting air bases and bombers. So it's technically air defense. And that's what Japan wants to do because they know if China gets an offensive capability and it'll be kind of too late by then. You're going to get into the Saran paradox where you have to waste missiles to down that threat. And if you don't, if you don't kill the archer, it's going to keep shooting. It's going to keep shooting arrows at you. So that's kind of the Japanese calculus. Going further south with Taiwan, I mean, the Taiwan stuff is relatively obvious. Big invasion fleet would have to come over the strait to invade your island. How are you going to defeat that invasion fleet? A lot of missiles. Then you get to the Philippines. Philippines is a bit more interesting, right? Because Philippines geographically has a lot more similar with Japan actually than Taiwan. Taiwan has a pretty small strait separated from the mainland. You could do a lot of interesting stuff with that distance. You could do counter strike capability, for example, right? You could target the ports those ships are leaving from that have all the troops on board. You could target airfields too, and etc. With the Philippines, you kind of have a lot of distance, so you need long range missiles like as you brought Typhoon. Um, potentially other stuff, potentially strike aircraft, maybe a more capable navy if you guys have the money. Um, but there's also the other aspect of it's an archipelagic nation. You got to defend your sea lines of communication. Um, even if the Philippines doesn't get involved with a Taiwan conflict, right? Um, there's a potential for a spillover. I believe Bronner brought it up a couple of years back, right? Don't be prepared just to rescue OFWs, be prepared if they come for us. And, Luzon Strait, Bashi Channel, Sulu Sea, those are access points in and out of the first island chain. So, how exactly are those going to play in the Taiwan contingency? And the Philippines needs to prepare for that. The enemy is coming at you from various directions, whether it's a large expanse of water or the enemy's coming at you at these strategic points. So it's a very nuanced answer depending on where you go in the Philippines. Completely different South China Sea, completely different the Sulu Sea, completely different the Luzon Strait. So that's kind of how we're seeing developments since 2024, last time we talked.
Yeah, obviously for a non-expert audience, I just want to spell this out. So this is another discussion coming out. These are the maps of basically we're looking at the range of capabilities also of China. Like so think of China as a much bigger version of Iran, right? At the very least, right? In terms of their capability, they also have really advanced missile system, etc. But having said that, obviously, Aaron, we know that while I was very critical of grifters on the Middle East getting us into this trouble, I'm also very critical of grifters back in the Philippines using that to say, oh, let's just give up. Because if Iran can do that, China can do 10 times that, right? Why is that wrong, Aaron? Why is that kind of mindset wrong? Because last time I checked, we're a part of a network of alliances, and no offense to GCC, we are talking about Japan, Australia, South Korea, Taiwan. I mean, not to mention the US has a massive presence here. This is not going to be a pushover situation.
100%. I think the number one argument for not giving up is because there are two other regions across. There are two other countries on the first island chain that have planned for this and that consider the magnitude of the problem that China faces in the event of a conflict. Right. It's like, oh, they're bigger, they're more powerful. That doesn't stop Korea, Japan, Taiwan, other countries across the region from doing what they need to do to guarantee their
Sorry, just
security.
to put in context, like Japan alone is bigger than the entire GDP of like Middle East, I think, right? Like you combine all like people don't realize how big Japan alone is, right? Or Taiwan's GDP, I think, is as big, if not bigger than that of Saudi Arabia and Turkey. So I just because scale, right? Like Asia is just so big, people don't realize that we're not pushed over. And by the way, the Philippines has like 30 more million people than Iran. That's how big we are. Like So I think people
Of
tend
course.
to lose sight because China is so big. Obviously, China is not small, but we're also not small, are we?
Yeah, and there's a lot of local advantages, based on the terrain, based on the environment, based on your alliances that you could build off of. I've frequently seen this sort of defeatism across Philippine strategic thought. We think, I think over, Manila, they're obviously, it's not. We talked about this before, I believe. It's not as developed in terms of strategic culture. DC has a lot of think tanks. DC has a lot of institutions. I got a great education at American University. Um, so there's a big discrepancy. So they're obviously going to see things in a different light, perhaps a much more simpler light. It's not all about GDP. It's not all about population. It's not all about all of this aspects. The Philippines, I think the number one thing they could do is kind of understand your threat and maybe design your procurement, design your defense strategies around that threat. Relatively simple. That's a pretty simple state. It sounds stupid in retrospect, but I think with a lot of people looking at the Philippines when they make these statements, when these grifters make these statements, they don't really put into perspective the full picture, as we were talking before previously. So it's definitely possible for the Philippines. If other countries could do it, the Philippines could do it. And I don't see any other reasons not to, at least on the strategic picture.
Can we talk about it? So since last we met in Washington, D.C., like how far the Philippines has come, because not long after our conversation, you have Defense Secretary Gibo openly talking about the Philippines being more or less within the, he called it the Taiwan linkage, which I think is even more correct way of putting it. Kudos to Secretary Gibo. We have the comprehensive archipelagic defense concept coming out. We have President Marcos signaling more that we're going to be part of JAFOS, or at least that's how I call it, Japan, Philippine, US trilateral framework. We now have the Squad, right? Obviously, we're moving from a low base, but uh, Aaron, would I be a little bit over zealous to say the Philippines has made a huge jump just in the past 2, 3 years alone, considering the low base we had, but nevertheless, moving in the right direction, and probably the speed is not as bad.
I would say that, the priorities are there, but when it comes to actually taking action, um, where it's still a bit too slow, honestly speaking. I mean, that's kind of been the trend with Philippine defense strategy and Philippine defense planning. It's low speed. Now, whether that's because Congress won't pass necessary laws or approve the funding,
The
or there's a lack of
procurement
political
issues, yeah,
willpower,
yeah.
there could be a variety of answers to that. But frankly speaking, you kind of look at what they do, whether it's SRDP, CADC, and all of this, and you read it, and you're left thinking, what does this actually do? It's been a couple of years, it's a year or two since SRDP. Where's the movement? Where's the investments into domestic industries? CADC, CADC, I think is some of the most egregious when it comes to progress. Because let's be honest here, right? There should be a publicly available CADC document, unclassified, that the average Filipino could read, or that allies and partners in Tokyo or Washington could read, so they could get a better understanding of Philippine defense strategy. Why isn't there a CADC document out right now? It's been years. So I think the priorities are there. I don't think the policy and the movements necessarily on the ground, and kind of a bit concerned concerning the time scale we're talking about here. Right, the Philippines simultaneously does not have the necessary funding, political willpower, or time to get its stuff together. If we're going to be honest here, it kind of ran out of time like a decade ago, post 2012 Scarborough, and could have made up for it, but because of lack of political willpower, certain administrations, all of that jazz, it's been a it's they're not exactly where they need to be. I would also kind of be relative speaking, as you brought up. There has been a lot of progress. The priorities are there now. They understand that the Luzon Strait could potentially see some stuff that was kind of unheard of like a couple of years back, right? They understand the stuff in the South China Sea now, and they're really leveraging the U.S. alliance. And on the flip side, right, Washington values the Philippines a lot more, and I mean a lot more than it did 6 years
Can we
back.
talk about that? I call that almost strategic sympathy, like whether it's Bridge, whether it's Rubio. I mean, all of them saying like the Philippines is punching well above its weight, it's putting a lot in. There was never a demand for us to increase our GDP to defense spending ratio. A lot of appreciation, and I see that really sincere. I mean, talking to really folks off the record, you can see the sincerity there. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, sure. So a big thing with this this administration's analysis of partners and allies. It's not just defense spending, and I think this is what bails the Philippines out because the Philippine defense spending is probably its biggest weakness. But the biggest strength of the Philippines for the United States is the geography. It's in a geographically really significant place. If you look at it, as on this map, access Southeast Asia, just near China, and access near Taiwan. Key part of keeping any major Chinese force within the first island chain. It's a forward operating base for anything operating against China and helping out Taiwan. So this is, just based off the geography alone. That's pretty big. But with the funding aspect, I think there could be room to improve for the Philippines, because aside from the alliance aspect, right, a country should just invest in itself. You know, um, I think a lot of people in Manila should question if the Americans weren't here, or if no allies were here, what could we do? That's a question Taiwan asks itself all the time. That's a question Korea is definitely asking itself right now, and that's a question Japan has considered for a long time. So I would like to see more stuff for the Philippine side, not just through the alliance aspect, but also, for Manila, uh, if it truly wants to path a middle power or or an independent foreign policy or so.
Yeah, this is very important and very urgent. I mean, I would just say on the domestic front, I think we have achieved a lot over the past 10 years. Basically, we have made it politically incorrect to question the Philippine claims in the area. We saw some of the senators really basically got racial right and left every time they even give a hint of China's talking points in their speeches. And I think that's a fantastic achievement considering what monstrosity we had to deal with in the idiocy that was Duterte's foreign policy, right? So on the domestic front, I think we rallied the public opinion, and I say we because like back in the day, there were just a few of us who were like carrying the torch, Justice Scarpio, I, a couple of other people, but now it's mainstream. Then you have Transparency Initiative by really, really amazing figures like no more Commodore. I think he's Admiral Tariel right now. Congratulations,
Yep.
Admiral. He just got promoted after getting trolled by some senators. Uh, so yeah, you have a lot of fantastic people, Secretary Gibo, Tariela, of course our NSA. I mean, so many good people there. So I think they're going to be pillars of a new strategic culture. Having said that, right? Um Duterte could still be the next Philippine president, right? I remember 2 years ago I was talking about the risking and Trump proofing when few people were taking the possibility of second Trump administration seriously. I mean, with the potential horizon of another Duterte in Malacanang, which is far from given, people can check my analysis of why someone like Lenny actually has a very good chance. There was an internal survey very recently. I won't say it's Lenny, but that suggests actually there's a good chance of beating Sara Duterte, but it's going to be very tough. Needs coalition building, but it's a completely different conversation. But going back to this, there is the shadow of another Duterte, which basically means at the very least loss of momentum, right? If not reverse momentum. How are we gonna work around that? Or at least that's the discourse I'm hearing from a lot of our allies who are coming to me saying, Richard, we love the Philippines, especially Europeans and all, saying like, I was just like in different European countries last year, just talking to our friends in Paris, in London, in Poland, whatnot. And some of our friends come to me and say, we're worried we put all of these investments. What happens if there's another administration? I just said, well, if you don't put these investments, for sure we know where this is going to go because you have to create those structural ties. You have to nest the alliance, I always say, right? You have to create momentum, inertia, right? Because that would matter. And that will allow us to argue for this continuous buildup of multilateral networks of basically minilateral networks of cooperation with our allies. What do you think about that, Aaron?
Yeah. So
And
with
conversations in the US about that also, like worries.
yeah, I know. Unfortunately, in the U.S., there's not that many conversations. I believe last time we talked, I explained to you a big reason why I'm doing this is so I could help, expand the advocacy for the Philippine Alliance in the U.S. I mean, just because there's kind of not that much understanding, relatively speaking, of the alliance, and unfortunately, that's kind of been upheld. And I've that's been bugging me for the past I don't know 6 years I've been doing this. So unfortunately, in the U.S., I would say the concern is not there. I feel like once Marcos came in, everybody was just like, oh, it's over, and I'm like, no, it could come back. If it happened once, it could happen again. Number two, though, I like your question on how could Philippine partners kind of tell Filipinos why the alliances matter. Um, I think we need to see a lot more movement on other aspects, especially economic, right? Because that's what impacts the average Filipino. Um, we need to see a lot more movement on the Luzon corridor. You need to see it needs to be a lot more tangible to a lot more Filipinos beyond Luzon. Luzon is like the imperial capital of the Philippines, and it has all the power and economic power.
Careful
But
with what you said. You might get persona non grata like me. I heard even in DC they heard what happened to me about that Human Development Index CNN report.
oh no, and like I mean, the thing, right, is I mean that's the point, right? Everybody focuses on Luzon, but you got to go to the other places. The other places are what matters. Um, I'm Filipino American. I was born in Chicago, Illinois. My father's side is from Ilocos Norte, and my mother's side is from Leyte.
Yeah,
And
now they're gonna say it's a solid North conversation between two
it's
of
all
us.
North conversation. But Leyte was interesting, man, because I did the South China Sea Park in June, right, last June, thanks to now Admiral Tariella. And I went out. Right after that, I went for my grandmother's birthday, and I was talking with her. She was like, "Aaron, like, why would you do this? Like, the Chinese aren't even in my front yard because she lives on the beach." I'm like, "Grandma, you live on the western side of Leyte. You're not even looking out to the water because this is like who we need to deal with, right? We need to kind of expand the people we target and this sort of stuff because this is about narratives. I know FMI, foreign malign influence is a big thing over there. And, foreign malign influence can't just end with the centers of power. You have to reach out to other places in the Philippines because that's what matters, right? Um, the way the Chinese work with this UFW stuff, um, you know, obviously the political aspects in Manila and Cebu and in Davao City, that's what matters. But let's say operationally, in the event of a potential conflict, what happens to the places that we don't target with this economic and political assistance? And how will they act once the Chinese bring them a better offer? You see how these Chinese consulates act in northern Luzon. You see how the Chinese act
I
in
just met the
in
ambassador,
Davao.
the Chinese ambassador. He's extremely charming. I'm not saying that like, they're very capable. But he was with the DCM there at Washington, D.C. So you're talking about they're sending their top guys to Manila. These are
Yeah,
professionals. I don't know who's the incoming US ambassador. The previous one, she was amazing, really one of the best ever ambassadors in Manila, without a question. Uh, is it another Trump Florida guy they're sending? But I'm just saying the Chinese are sending their A-level guys.
and
Maybe
they're
not the
definitely
spokesman of the
keen
Chinese
on.
embassy, but the ambassador. 2 hours of conversation with him. We talked about everything under the sun. It was almost like a Kissingerian conversation about world order. So we're talking about serious people, serious people.
Yeah, yeah, and that's my big concern. I don't know if Washington kind of I don't know if Washington or Tokyo kind of understands. These top level Chinese diplomats running around the Philippines, wooing everybody in places that would matter in a war, places like Northern Luzon, places like places around the Sulu Sea, and that has really tangible impacts. Again, we focus so much on the defense aspects, and I acknowledge as a defense specialist, they have to focus a lot more on the economic aspects too because the economics, the hearts and minds of it, right? That's what wins over the people on the ground, and that's what kind of matters at the end of the day. It's like, what would the people on the ground do if things went badly? And that's really influenced by what you do in the beforehand, the economic aid, the jobs you bring, all that sort of stuff. And the biggest concern that's always been right is uh, I like Chinese, the Chinese investment has not been really as strong. I mean, we've all seen the graphs, especially compared to Japanese stuff, right?
I called it
I think the
pledge trap,
Americans,
pledge
I
trap, like empty pledges.
yeah, I think if it wasn't for the Japanese, the Americans would be in shit, to be honest, because the Americans, especially with the USAID debacle, that was pretty big. So I would say we need to focus a lot more on the economic aspects because that's what would change a lot of stuff, and that has tangible benefits in the event of wartime. Um, it would probably prevent a lot of people from turning traitor. They're already turning traitor right now, so maybe we got to do a lot more work. So I think that's some steps that these foreign partners could start taking. Obviously, it's going to take a lot of convincing, right? Because I do understand where they're coming from. Um, Washington was well, it's Washington had a hard time dealing with Duterte one, if a Duterte two comes, and it's relatively unknown waters then. I mean, I don't. I mean, I will admit I am pretty lackluster on Philippines domestic politics compared to you and some other folks. But the movement from Sarah right now, I mean, that's within the last 2 years, that was crazy. That's insane looking at it. So I don't know how
I mean,
Washington's
she
going to
speaks
navigate that.
Mandarin. I don't know if you can call that Mandarin, but she's already preparing to give her an inauguration in Mandarin or like. I mean, it's just so crazy. I don't even know if I should cry or laugh. So we're just like having this like Russian dark humor style of jokes. I mean, I don't know if you've got some of my other podcasts where I'm a little bit more lighthearted to put it, like in a dark humor way, but. I want to go to the last part of our conversation, which I think is very important. So I mean, we saw in the last 3 years a country like Ukraine with GDP like what 200 billion, 150 billion, Iran with a GDP of similar to the Philippines, around 500 billion. If they're able to build such, obviously there's total war they're facing. I understand, but we saw how those countries, of course, are totally different countries. I'm not saying but these are mid-sized countries, even smaller than the Philippines, and yet it looks like they were able to build up some significant military capability and stand up to superpowers. So realistically, does the Philippines have the basic resources to be a serious middle power for that matter? Despite all the differences, obvious differences we can talk about.
I mean, the big difference, right, is the political willpower. Um, I think I think in Manila, it's yet they do understand the South China Sea threat, but at the same time, I don't think they understand the Chinese threat. I think those are two really big things, right? Water cannons, seizing of territories and stuff. That's one thing. The entire People's Liberation Army and the capabilities they have and how they could screw you up. That's a completely another thing that I just don't think the Armed Forces of the Philippines really kind of contextualizes. A recent anecdote I could kind of bring up is I was looking at this Katihan exercise, this army exercise they're doing right now in on the tip of the Luzon Plains. So you land. I forgot what the bay is. It's like I'm gonna butcher this, like Pasaginan or whatever. Yep.
Yeah, correct. I mean, the
Yeah,
pronunciation is a bit too American, but you
I'll
got it.
get better. I'll get better as a Phil am, but
You have to
um,
work on your Ilocano too, man. Like you owe us a
I'll
lot.
work on it. Yes, sir. But they they were fighting on the beaches. They were firing artillery shells like it was World War II. That's not gonna do anything against the Chinese. And I think when it comes to this lack of understanding, this obviously has really big implications for deterrence, for how the Chinese view you guys in the event of a Taiwan thing. I don't think there's really that level of understanding. And if there was that level of understanding, I think you would see a massive buildup right now because they would understand that they're here. The Chinese are all the way across the room, and I think that would make them panic, honestly. But I don't think they understand that, and maybe that's me giving them the benefit of the doubt. Maybe they do understand, and maybe they don't want to do anything. But I'm gonna assume that they don't understand it. So that's the number one thing. Now let's say they want to do it. They do have the resources, mineral rich country. A big issue right now that's being raised with this Iran stuff is that the U.S. is going rapidly through its explosive stockpile. Now, explosives require a certain subset of minerals, and you got to mine. And we all know how great the
Which
mines are in
China
the
controls
Philippines.
a lot of those deadly metals. There was the Economist release, or like China controls two or three of them, like up to 80-90%. So you might need
Yeah,
China to get the metals to rebuild the weapons that we might use
uh,
against China. I'll say.
I mean, with the with certain basic stuff, right? Like let's say explosives, like you could do that with what you have. You guys have necessary minerals, necessary components.
Nickel, we're
Obama's
number two in the world.
Yeah, exactly. You got a lot of important stuff. Now the big question is how do you attract foreign investors, foreign defense companies to help you guys out for the modernization? And I'm not an economic person. Maybe you could talk to an economic person about that. But the big issue is there's no defense industrial base whatsoever. You have basic arms, you have basic armories from the government that make guns and ammunition, but you have nothing on the level of mass artillery production. You have nothing on the level of making your own armored vehicles or even making a large warship. So you don't the basics aren't there yet. And the real question is how do you use like these laws that were recently passed, like SRDP, to get this stuff rolling? And it's a complicated thing, especially with the Philippines. You got to attract investor confidence. This is a pretty big undertaking. Investors with this defense aspect, if they don't see the will there. They're thinking, we're going to build a shipyard, we're going to build an arms plant, and then what's the return? Nothing. A big example of this actually is Austal. Austal is an Australian shipbuilder. They build a lot of stuff. They build a lot of stuff for the U.S. Navy, Australian Navy, etc. They have actually a shipyard in Cebu. It's one of the most capable shipyards of theirs in the region, and they built it with the intent of not just building up ferries and all of that, but also the Philippine Navy OPV program, the Offshore Patrol Vessel program. So they really invested a lot in the Philippines. They were like, we're going to do these domestically in the Philippines and we get your stuff rolling. They went with Korea instead. And you have the shipyard that's kind of not really being used for its full potential. You have a lot of shipyards not being used to their full potential because nobody's really willing to buy domestically for these really big purchases. There's a big exception for that, actually. DOTR through BFAR buys a lot of pro vessels. They're the really blue ones that always get rammed in water cannons. So you see those are Philippine made, but the other stuff they're Japanese, they're Korean, they're old American. So I think we need to see kind of like a shift. I would say for Philippine military modernization, focus on the fundamentals first. It's not going to be fancy. It's not going to be fancy at all. It's going to be bullets, artillery shells, basic weapons, and then you
Drones,
could start
drones. Can't
building
we
up.
do drones? Because I talked to Poles and Ukrainians. They're more than happy to help us on drones. I mean, if Iran can make drones like at the price of a single, I don't know, BYD car, I mean, why can't we do the same thing?
You could do drones for sure. I think that's also one of the basics, especially with how warfare is conducted today. Drones are pretty easy to get set up. It's pretty easy industry, but I would also kind of warn what you're seeing in Ukraine is kind of like a drone warfare and evolution. Uh, the drones that you guys could make um, might not be the drones that are kind of needed uh, in a high intensity conflict like Ukraine.
Ah,
Ukraine, the
I
drones
see.
evolve every yeah, like Ukraine, the drones evolve like so fast. It used to be like you take a civilian model, put an RPG warhead on, it crash into the thing. Then the Russians are bringing jammers. Then
Be
you guys are
it yourself kind of drones. Yeah.
yeah, then you would have to put like a tethered cable. So you literally have that's why you have so many plastic cables going across Ukraine. And then like now you have this there's a new evolution. So since all drones have a cable attached to them, like a tethered cable so they can't be jammed. What they're starting to do is they're starting to bring lasers along with them so they can burn out the sensors. So even if you control your drone, you can't see what's going on anymore. So it keeps evolving, right? And I think if it's important for the Philippines to develop a drone industrial base, they need to really take away the lessons. It can't just be, let me
That's
just take an RC toy off the
absolutely.
shelf and let's roll this. There needs to be number one, uh, considering these lessons need to be really up to par. And that's something they got to do. It's not as easy. I think the basis of it is it's a good start, and you should definitely do it. But just keep in mind, it's not going to be as easy as you think it would be, especially with supply chains, right? So,
Absolutely. I mean, as you know, one of the things I'm focused on, and one of the things I'm also focusing on here in Oxford is industrial policy, like the economics of warfare. This is very important, and looking forward to actually talking also to our finance secretary, Go, among others, maybe BBM also next month. About the need for the Philippines to really build an industrial base because that will help you in terms of your defense sector, not to mention in terms of supply chain resilience, and not to mention, of course, creating jobs, better life, right? I'm just shocked at how weak the industrial policy discourse in the Philippines is. Probably as weak as here in the UK, which is a very
yeah.
Thatcherite country. But every other capital I've been in, Tokyo, DC, uh even Poland, France, Germany, obviously, China, everyone's talking about industrial policy now. There's Indonesia even, right? Malaysia has its own meaty. South Koreans are already ahead. Indians are getting into it. So you're absolutely right. That's why I'm saying like the industrial policy issue is important because it has a national security dimension to this. And one of the things I hear from perhaps more conservative circles in DC and like American affairs guys among others I've worked with is the Philippines could be part of this kind of a plus one co-development world whereby, we'll have more of the packaging and design, some part of fabrication of strategic semiconductors, products in the Philippines, like basically an industrial policy that is integrated among us allies with Japan, with Taiwan, with US. What are you hearing from your side? Because I'm hearing that more from my side in terms of people are more into the political economy, industrial policy side. But is it even like trickling into the defense circles, this kinds of discussion?
I mean, 100%. Like, you look at, I believe, like last year, Lockheed Martin raised the F-16 sale again for MRF, the the fighter program that's been delayed forever. Um, and they were like, okay, we could do a domestic MRO, so we could help you maintain the jets in country, which doesn't sound like that interesting. You know, it's not fancy, it's not missile, but if a multi-billion dollar American company is offering to set up facilities in your country, that means jobs, that means technical development, that means you learn how to maintain your fighter jets, and then you could go on from there. The possibilities are a lot. Then they were bringing up we could also set up training stuff with local universities in Manila, and that's big too because that helps improve your domestic intellectual base for design and all that sort of stuff. And
And they offer also scholarship to our engineers to go to top engineering schools. I was at that seminar with
yeah,
F-16 people and all of that. I mean, I'm a big fan of I love the F-16 and all. I don't know if you saw some of the pictures I posted doing the simulation. Like
I saw, yeah,
yeah, like a kid, right? Sorry about that, amateurs. But
nah, it's
no, no, I've been very strong on this. And to be honest, like, what's going on? Well, Philippines is complaining that obviously this will not be directly with Lockheed Martin. It will be via the United States, right? And I know a lot of folks got pissed off at me when I said, well, Israel is an exceptional case, but like, why would Egypt, Jordan, Pakistan, get some sort of pipeline to have those weapons? Like, they're poorer than the Philippines, they're less important than the Philippines, especially. I saw a lot of American friends didn't appreciate that. They were pushing back. It's like, but seriously, you're telling me Egypt deserves 10 times more FMF than Philippines? It's actually more than 10 times. They get up to 900 million. Like, I know I sound whiny when I say that, but I'm just being smart. Like, the Philippines has to make the most out of our alliance with the US. And it's not like we're useless allies. We want to be useful, but it's like, as Tom Cruise said, help me help you, right? We're like, help me
yeah.
help you. What's going on with
Uh,
that F-16 thing? I mean, what the heck?
I mean, the big issue's always been the cost, which from my perspective at least, I think it's a bit ridiculous to kind of say, "Oh, a fighter jet is expensive in 2026." Yeah, of course it's gonna be expensive. It's a fighter jet, and there's a reason why it's expensive. It's a high tech piece of equipment. It's gonna help you defend your country, and you pay for what you get for. If you want a bargain bin fighter jet, go for a bargain bin fighter jet, but don't expect it to be good. Obviously, there's price gouging and all of that, but um, I think that's kind of overlooks the big thing. Regarding your point where it's use the alliance, I think the Philippines is kind of getting they don't really do that. I think they take the first offer and then they roll with it. I don't think they kind of bend they don't twist the arm as much as other U.S. allies, right? Egypt and Pakistan. Those are two big
Jordan,
great cases.
Jordan lot.
And Jordan,
Ukraine is not even an ally, and they're getting hundreds of billions. I mean, it's
yeah,
crazy.
you got to appeal to you got to target Washington's fears, right? So Egypt is I have the Suez Canal. The Suez Canal is kind of important for everything in the world. Pakistan was the counterterrorism case, right? Where it's like, ooh, the Soviets are coming in, and then ooh, the Taliban are there. We need we need help.
But
Jordan,
dude,
same
like,
thing with
we're facing
counterterrorism.
China. Like, you don't even need to like boogeyman China. It's so big and in your face.
100%, and that's what confuses me. I'm like, China's there. Oh, what are you guys doing? Because if other U.S. allies and partners across the region could do the same thing, there's really no excuse for why you guys don't do that. And that's what always confuses me. I think I think it boils down to a lack of vision, and that's me being generous and not as passionate about it as I
Is
would
it
be.
vision, Aaron, or is it audacity? I mean, like the ways that I've seen Zelensky doing his shtick. I don't even need to talk about Netanyahu and some of the other allies, but even like smaller countries like Jordan, like Pakistan, among others, like with General Monir, is always in there. Like, they're so good in humoring the U.S. and getting what they need, right, in terms of their weapon systems, while also getting from China in the case of Pakistan, right? It's crazy. The Turks are also playing their own games there while developing their own Khan, I think, like fifth generation fighter system. So I just feel like we Filipinos are not stepping up. And is there like some sort of timidity on our part? We have like 4 or 5 million Filipinos there in the
I
US, and
mean, we
we're not
I mean,
punching
we
at
talked
our weight class. Forget about above it.
we talked about this before, right? Colonial mentality. I don't know what else to say. I
We
think
have to
I
fix
think
that. It's a strategic culture problem. Like, dude,
it
don't
is.
be
It really is.
intimidated. Yeah.
Sometimes when I was in Manila last summer, sometimes I was talking with these guys, and I'm like, could one of you just not agree with me once, please? Could one of you stand up and advocate your ideas? Because just because I speak like an American doesn't mean I feel to trample all over you. Like, advocate for yourself. That's a really big thing that I think is not really there. A lot of formalities, a lot of stuff, especially with dealing with foreigners, and that degrades the true value of a lot of these lines could get. I think the advocacy really needs to be there for a lot of Philippine stuff to move forward, and that's coming from me, like
No, no, no. I mean, of course, you're an American with Filipino roots, so you kind of understand this in a special way, right? And I was just saying, like, I know a lot of people get pissed off at me here. He goes again, Richard, and with all of his chutzpah, but I'm sorry, it kind of works, right? Like, you have to be audacious in this world. You're not gonna get your share. You have to push for it, but you have to show you're capable, you're willing to commit, you're serious people, basically, right? You have to show you're serious people. I don't know. I mean, if probably I'll spend more time in the US, I hope to help organize the Filipino American community. We have to be a strong lobby interest group. We're really punching well below our weight. As a good friend of our Ronald would joke, like, you put like, let's just say ethnic group one, there are like 16 different groups in New Jersey of that ethnic group alone. It's like,
yeah.
it's crazy. Like, you put two Filipinos, three organizations come out. Like, we have to get over this Mickey Mouse culture, right? We have to be serious, put things together. So shout out to some of the good friends I have in DC Filipino American community who have been doing good job. I mean, we're getting that 2.5 billion package, right? The bipartisan ish.
I've
What's going
I've
on
heard
there?
I've heard some concerning
Tell me.
stuff on that. I gotta verify this. I mean, I've been really busy with this Iran stuff and this China stuff. Apparently, some sort of old law from 1935 may have forfeited the loan or a big part of that loan on the Philippine side, because I believe there's some sort of law. Again, I gotta look through it again, um, saying that we can't accept this amount of money. Uh, I'm not gonna be authoritative on if that's true or not. It's something I've heard, and I gotta look into it, and I'll look into that soon for sure. But with the 2.5 billion, let's say hypothetically in a world where that is going forward, um, that's guided by the SSAR security assistance roadmap. That's guided by a lot of stuff, and that's important, right? Because you're having the Americans basically hold you on what to get to defend your country. So that's pretty good. And they're going to invest a lot into infrastructure. They're going to invest into a lot of these new technologies, like potentially missile systems, potentially unmanned vehicles. Um, so there's stuff like that. Although, again, let's get back to the root of the issue. Who advocated for that? Was it the Philippine American diaspora? Was it Manila, or was it mainly U.S. senators going to the Philippines and seeing what's up? And they're like, "Hey, we need to help out the Philippines." And even when you look at the Philippine stuff, right? Is it really the amount of funding that should be compared to other partners? Is 2.5 billion really the amount that you guys could extract from Washington?
That's
And
like Jordan gets that in a year or two. I mean, what is no
yeah,
offense? I mean, what is Jordan compared to the Philippines? I mean, like, what is Jordan fighting again? Like ISIS? I mean, like,
Yeah, I think a good advocacy for the Philippines, right? If they really want this military modernization, is number one to kind of, I'm not saying pick a side, but I think I'm going to say they should probably lock down a side. Um, really apprehensive on Taiwan for obvious reasons, right? Taiwan is a politically dubious thing for
it's a
any Filipino
minefield.
advocacy.
I love
It's a
them, but
mind.
it's a minefield. Yeah.
But if Filipinos want to do an under the table thing with Washington and say, "Hey, help us modernize our military to, deter the Chinese in the South China Sea, and you could use our bases or something," something like that. I mean, that's kind of in the understanding for a lot of Washington's allies historically. Another thing too is I think communicating the extent of how bad things really are, um, of how truly bad things really are across the AFP, how these guys don't have what they need, how how all the systems are compromised by Chinese cyberware and malware. Um, basically tell Washington it's like, hey, if you don't help us out, we're going to collapse on D1, like day one of the war, and you're going to have to bail us out big time, like big time. So you better build us up so we don't get into a complete disaster when something does happen. Um, I don't know if Washington kind of understands that. I've always tried to communicate that with a lot of the American folks I talk to, where it's like, hey, they tell you one thing, in reality, here's how it is. And no disrespect to any people in the armed forces of the Philippines. I know a lot of good folks in there. They do the best with what they have. I think they deserve a lot better, and that's why I think the alliance should be better in that aspect. Same with the Philippine Coast Guard, right? So definitely that communication issue. We need more advocacy from the Filipinos. you don't want. I think getting advocacy from Americans for the Filipinos are good, but I think hearing it directly from the Filipinos would not only increase the respect the Americans have for you, but also potentially the Chinese might start viewing you guys differently, because frankly speaking, the Chinese don't respect you guys, right? And I think we should start
Yeah, they only
examining.
respect you if you stand. I mean, like person, individual, I can see they respect me because they know I'm a strong.
Yeah,
Like I am a strong. Like they're not gonna tell me what to do, right? I could see it like at the micro level. If you stand up, they'll respect you. But if you're like, whatever, they're contemptuous. That's just how they work.
yeah, 100%. So I think I definitely agree with you there. I think there could be more leverage, and I like how this expands on our previous conversations. So I like your point on that.
Which brings me really to the penultimate side. I mean, how is the Filipino food scene? I mean, this was a big thing. You know me, I dip my fingers. I'm a pretentious Renaissance man. So I was very much into Michelin star issue. I don't know if you saw some of my posts there. People were like, what the hell is there? Actually, I was in, if people check two of my interviews with two different French ambassadors on my TV show, like I raised that issue very seriously. So you can imagine what was happening behind the scenes. So I'm like, if you're a Filipino patriot, you want your food also to be appreciated, not only getting the defense equipment and all. Chicago is special because that's the first, I think, Filipino food Michelin star restaurant ever, right?
Yep.
Um, can you tell me about the food scene now since last time we talked in DC? Is it evolving? Is the Filipino food getting the kind of respect and credit it deserves? And I don't know, for me, food diplomacy is very important. It gets people more interested in your culture and country. And that's diplomacy. That's how things can work in very strategic ways too.
100%. When I was in Manila, a good friend of mine from DC, and if you're watching, who I'm talking about, came over to Manila, and the first thing I did, other than introducing him to a lot of interesting people, was let's get you acclimated with the food, and he fell in love. So, the food scene, in America is definitely the most powerful aspect, right? I think Ambassador Amaldas did a talk like around this time last year, and he was like, "Adobo diplomacy." I think it was like Kamala loved it or something. Kamala loved it. So, the food scene, Philippine food scene in Chicago, it's always been great. I don't know if you know this. There's a chain called Seafood City. It's a Filipino grocery store chain across the U.S. And it's
Wow,
really
I'm gonna get
it's
a
really
picture there because I'm always at Jollibee doing that, like national pride.
it, it's it goes a step above that though because they've popularized raves at these grocery stores. I don't know if you've seen the videos. I don't know if you've seen the videos, but it's a bunch of titas and titos.
Please send me the
I'll
thing.
send it.
I'm so excited.
I'll send it.
So this
Yeah,
is all over the US. I mean, not
all
just
the
in
U.S. Yeah,
California.
they close the store for like a Friday night from like 10 to like I think early hour mornings, and they just have a rave. They take like calamansi shots. It's a great time. My sisters went to one recently in Chicago. It was great. I couldn't make it, but it's
What
definitely
about
the
our food?
biggest.
Ilocano food. Is it we have fantastic food, Ilocano food. It's very balanced, I would say.
I mean, we still need. I think it's still getting there. Yeah, because everybody when they think of Filipino food, they just think of the party food, right? So think it's like the sisig, the lumpia, all
Yeah,
that. I
exactly.
think we're I think we're still a bit away from getting to the regional varieties, compared to like the Koreans or Japanese. That's where the food
That's
diaspora
the way,
really
the
blossomed.
Italian way, right? Like the Italian way.
Italian,
Yeah,
yeah, for sure. So
fantastic.
it's been going pretty well. Um, any other questions regarding
No,
any of
I,
the
I think we're almost done. I just want, sorry, I'm squeezing a lot out of you here. I know you're exhausted and all. On the cheap, I remember 10 years ago, Sinas came out with this report like, with this amount of resources, Philippines can develop minimum credible deterrence. Do we have some idea about that now, 10 years later? I mean, do you have some package of things we have to put together? I don't know, like one submarine, two squadron of F-16. I know it sounds like PlayStation, like two boys talking about guns and all, but no, but realistically, I mean, do you have a rough idea what should the Philippines put together in the next three? I mean, we're in the third horizon, third part of the third horizon. I don't know wherever we are.
Yeah, I'll try to keep this brief because this could be probably another podcast altogether.
Yeah, this will
Um,
be a segue to future discussions.
of course. So I've always seen it in a couple of ways: the status quo, the real deterrence, and then maybe like if you want to do something like a crash program. If let's say like we do envision Taiwan happening soon, So let's start with like right now, right? If you want to keep the status quo, which is keep stuff balanced out China Sea, make sure the Chinese don't encroach on anything else. Definitely build up what they're doing right now, which is the deterrent strategy, the missiles, all of that. Get a basic capability up. Iran right now is teaching us that certain aspects of that strategy are pretty weak. For example, right, Iranian missile boats are kind of easy targets for U.S. missiles right now because they have no air defense, right? They just have missiles on them. And when I think of the Philippines, I think of the Acero class patrol boat. It's a bunch of these Israeli missile boats that they got, and I look at them. They don't have jamming on them. They don't have electronic warfare to shield them. They don't have any air defense, and they have really short range missiles. An average Chinese anti-ship missile goes like around, I don't know, like 60 to 120 kilometers. This ship can only fire targets 32 kilometers away. So what do you think is going to happen, right? You're going to go from Subic and you're going to torn up in the blue water of the South China Sea or West Philippine Sea. So look at certain procurements, kind of rethink. Do I really want to throw my guys away like this, and then go from there? But overall, missiles, keeping them away from metropolitan Philippines, right? That's a big thing. The second theory I've had is real deterrence, and what I mean by that is um, South China Sea. I know former Admiral Ong. This is a big thing of his. He is always kind of viewing, it's untenable to defend the KIG. It's untenable to like do a lot of stuff in South China Sea. Kind of true, Chinese control everything out there. So what do you do if you can't control it? You turn them into first strike assets. If you're gonna lose them, you may as well use them. So you may as well get a punch out before you go down. Put a lot of stuff that could hurt the Chinese really fast, really badly, with the assumption that they'll go down. And this goes alongside stuff on metropolitan Philippines like Palawan and Luzon. Get capabilities that will strike the Chinese far from Philippine shores. Make sure you can target the rear. Keep a good defense of the islands. Part of that first part, and then the last part. Let's say the Philippines gains, I don't know, some sort of actual intel that China might want to do something with it. Maybe focus on what you really need to defend yourself, uh, and focus on getting stuff that you could get within a short period of time. So it's been an interesting theory of mine. I'm a naval reporter, so that's really weird too. The biggest strength the Philippines has is fighting a ground war, kind of actually, and that's a bit odd. But it takes a long time for the Chinese to land troops in Luzon. It's going to take a lot of time to get them resupplied. And if you get a good army up on the central Luzon plain around like Tarlac, around like around Clark, around that area, you could wear them down pretty well. Use the island geography to your advantage. So I know I'm not going to the submarine and procurement aspect you brought up, but the way I always kind of see it is, what's the threat? What strategies and what plans would blunt that threat, and what would I need to enact those plans and strategies? Um, I want to keep it brief. We could talk a lot about that maybe next time, right?
Yeah, which is
But
perfect because we'll hopefully have also the admiral, the good admiral here back on this show because he's a very asymmetric warfare guy. So I think there's so much we can draw from the ongoing, so many data points. Thank you so much, Aaron Matthew Lariosa, joining us on this podcast episode, who covers, of course, Philippine military modernization and U.S. strategy in many ways in the Indo-Pacific region for United States Naval Institute and Naval News. Mabuhay, as I told you 2 years ago when we were together in DC, I mean, I see you as representation of new generation of Filipino Americans who are doing fantastic in terms of contributing to a better understanding of a very complex region. I'm so glad to see the level of nuance and lack of Mickey Mouse stuff that I've seen in IR world in the Middle East. And you're definitely part of that. And please continue to do what you're doing. And how so people obviously can follow you. What are the Twitter and what are the different handles you have you want to share for people to check your stuff?
uh, just link it. Honestly, I actually do not remember my Twitter handle by name. I should. I know I should, but I kind of just view Twitter as a place to throw my stuff out there and let's see where it goes. So
Where it goes.
I'm sure Richard will share
Absolutely.
links. Yeah,
Have a lovely day and talk to you soon. Please also get good rest. As you can see in my eye bags, we're all really working around the clock, so much to cover. But these are indeed historic times, and unfortunately, more I think will come in other parts of the world in the coming years. I don't think the world will get any more
yeah,
peaceful. Thank you, Aaron. God bless, and send my regards to your dad and my fellow Ilocanos out there.
of course. Yeah, thank you, Richard. Thank you.
As always.